So welcome to Brown Bag History for October 22nd, 2025. Today we're talking about bears. And as we begin, we want to acknowledge that the land around Revelstoke and on the Columbia River and its tributaries is this next homeland and traditional territory. We acknowledge the ties of the Secwepemc, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and the Ktunaxa to this land. We acknowledge our use and habitation of this land sacred to these four nations. We respectfully honor their traditions and culture. So I'm going to tell a bunch of bear stories that I came across in the newspaper. There's a few interesting ones, but the prevailing attitude back then was see a bear, shoot a bear. That was it. That was what tended to happen most often with human bear encounters. But of course, they'd use the hides, they'd use the meat. There was a story, the Fraser family were one of the first sort of farmer settlers here in the 1880s, and they had a farm in Big Eddy. And you can actually see the the uh, the bridge, so that's how close they were to the railway tracks in Big Eddy. It'd probably be fairly close to well, just when you cross when the railway bridge crosses, it would be right down in that area. And you can see they had a lot of clearing to do when they started, but they eventually ended up with a good-sized farm there. And he had several cows, and there was a story that was printed in the Kootenai Star newspaper in August of 1892. Said last Sunday evening, Mr. F. Fraser went to fetch home the cows before going to church. He took his gun with him, as there were several bears in the district. So he almost stepped on a half-grown cub, which he killed, and then he saw another cub under a log. He fired at it, but just didn't kill it, but the bear started screaming, which brought the mother bear around. So Fraser started to run for home, only to find himself face to face with another large bear. And so one of the cows had turned back towards Fraser and lowered her horns and hit the bear square in the ribs with the quote from the newspapers, with a thud that might have been heard half a mile away and rolling him over like a log. The cow also went off after the mother bear, and Fred Fraser was able to get home safely. And the newspaper said the cow smiled all the while she was being milked, well knowing she was a match for a dozen bears any day. That's a good example of the kind of the style of the writing back in the newspapers of the day as well. Everything was a joke. There was another story from 1903. Charles Deutschmann, who's credited with discovering the Nakamu Caves. The cave discovery happened a couple of years after this story, said he shot an enormous grizzly near Glacier. The head measured 18 inches from the level of ears to the snout, 32 inches in circumference, and 11 inches from ear to ear. And the head alone weighed 24.5 pounds. The hide measured 8.5 feet long by 7.5 feet wide. It was believed to be the largest grizzly killed in that area. Another interesting story from May 25th, 1922. Emma Nelson, who was the wife of the famous skier Nels Nelson, was startled by a bear in the back garden of their home in Clearview, which is CPR Hill. Ironically, Nels Nelson was on a bear hunt with his friends up the Jordan River. So she called her uncle, Henry Needham, who came and shot the bear, which they planned to make into a rug. And I never found anything about whether Nels got anything on his hunting trip, but he came home to find that his wife had managed to get a bear. Another cute story from 1922 in June. He said, this bear knew what he wanted. Fred Maunder, who was the park superintendent, had a story of an incident involving a huge grizzly at the 4 Mile camp on the Mountain Auto Road, which the road that they were building to the top of Mount Revelstoke. He said a couple of guys were working a few yards down the road. They left some of their supplies outside the cabin. In their absence, Mr. Bear had discovered a bottle of tea, which he drank. He next spied a cake of soap, which he in some way worked into a lather, undoubtedly enjoying a bath, for he afterwards proceeded to the cabin and helped himself to a shirt, evidently with the purpose of drying himself. This done, he was in good trim for reading, for he had taken a copy of the Rod and Gun Club magazine and forcefully perused it, the marks of his claws being seen on many of the pages. Having slaked his thirst, enjoyed a bath, and read the magazine, he apparently went away satisfied, as he was seen soon afterwards making his way through the underbrush. So there's a lot of cute stories about bears. Um, but as I said, there was a lot of hunting of bears that was going on as well. And a lot of people brought in dogs, especially as hunting dogs. Not sure what happened. We have photographs, and we don't always know the story behind the photographs. That was a big bear shot at Isaac Creek, south of Revelstoke. Isaac Creek is that's a Cocolex. Okay, I wasn't sure about that. Another story from 1927 at Malaqua. There was a logging company working out there cutting cedar posts when they discovered after one of the cedars that they cut off, they actually cut off the head of a dead bear, which was inside the tree. So the tree was about 3 feet in diameter, and figured the bear was under a year old and had probably died a couple of years earlier. Figured that the bear had climbed up from under the roots and blocked the entrance and couldn't get back out again and died in there. There was another note about a large black bear had been mauling calves at the Hillcrest Ranch, which is where the Hillcrest Hotel is now, and the brewery up in that area. And Leslie Campbell, the ranch owner, waited for the bear and one night and shot it. This is a photograph taken near Canborn. Bill Souls grew up in Beaton, and it was kind of a mark of manhood was to get your first grizzly bear. This was 1954.
Is that supposed to be March 25th or May 24th?
Probably May. Mary. I don't know who Mary is, but and we've got lots of photographs of people feeding bears. So these people were very bear unaware. This is the Hashimoto family who, there's still members of the Hashimoto family in town. And the Hashimotos were in this area as early as 1910, 1911. And Mr. Hashimoto worked as a crew boss for the Japanese Canadian work gangs on the railway. And his wife, Hisa, worked as a camp cook when they used to sort of actually just live in the boarding cars as they moved along the line. So they're actually feeding a bear there. So we've got lots of pictures of this kind of behavior. There was another Japanese Canadian family who lived out there. This is a little child, about a year old. His father is holding him, and there's the bear right there. A little hard to see the little boy. His name is Haruji. He's still alive. He's in his 90s now, and he's provided with us a lot of his family photographs. Railway cook, crew cook feeding bears. He's camp cook because he's got his apron on there and his white jacket. That was near Stony Creek. Yeah, so very, very common. And look, there's 3 cubs, and there's the mother. She seems very unconcerned. And this is the same mother bear on the right there. And that's a large jar of jam that she has between her very massive paws. And then there's another fellow feeding a black bear from a rail car. So there was lots of those incidents that were going on there. And people had pet bears. Quite often they'd say, oh, it was an orphaned bear, but I'm not sure, whether they actually knew it was an orphaned bear or they just saw a bear cub and was able to get out of there without any sign of a mother. So these photographs, we actually have a series of several photographs taken by Emma Roberts. We have a whole album of her photos. She and her daughters spent a lot of time on Mount Revelstoke, and they would go for hikes up there. So it's possible that on one of their hikes, they came across these orphan cubs, brought them into town. I couldn't find any newspaper note about this, but they had these two cubs. They chained them up. There they are chained climbing a tree, and there they are feeding them cherries. We have other pictures of them feeding them candies. And there's another picture of a little boy with them, and the little boy has a mosquito hat on. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be some sort of protection against the bears, but the mother said he had to have some protection on, I guess. But this was very common. There was the Marino family, which is one of the early Italian families. They lived sort of close between the industrial park and the Hillcrest area. And there's Mrs. Marino had a little cub that she found as an orphan cub, and she gave it bottles of milk. And but usually these stories didn't end well because baby bears grow up to be big bears, and they're just they don't. Most of those stories that I've come across didn't never ended well for the bear. Black bear at the kitchen of the glacier camp in 1957. And this is it's either Revelstoke Dam or Mica Dam. I can't remember which. And another fellow feeding a bear. So very common. People fed bears all the time. Really interesting story that happened in 1914. There was a man named Hart Monroe who was quite a fascinating character. I've given a talk just on his life because great, he had a great storyteller. Not sure whether all of his stories were 100% true, but really good stories. Anyway, he grew up back east, came to Revelstoke around 1897, and he was trapping and prospecting in the area. So he had trap lines in the Jordan River, and it was legal to trap bears until the 1920s. So it said one spring in their 20-mile stretch of the Jordan, they trapped and shot no less than 54 bears. It said that in a radius of 20 miles, the bears would come to the steep slides on the Jordan, where the strong spring sun caused the slides to run, leaving lovely green grass and tons of slide lily roots. So there was a depressed market for furs in 1913. The local buyer was Frank Wells, who had a men's clothing store, and we have his fur press downstairs. Hart Monroe told several of the so Frank Wells at that time wasn't buying furs because he didn't have a market for them. So Hart Monroe told several of the French Creek miners that he would buy their furs, and he arranged for a loan from the Molson's Bank of for $300 and bought furs from several of the prospectors and trappers in the area. And so he started into the fur buying business himself. So this incident happened in May of 1914. He said, I invited a friend with me on a trip up the Jordan to look over my bear traps. I had just bought a couple of half-grown Airedale pups, and I wanted to train them by showing them some black or brown bears in a trap. I realized that without some experience with such handicapped enemies, they would not stand much of a chance against a grizzly. We found a beautiful black bear, 2 years old, caught by one front foot, and snagged up under a large cedar windfall. I tried to kill the bear by striking him in the top of the head after crawling out on the windfall, but found out that the front foot, still free, came past my head in a blur of speed. As it was then about noon, we decided to cut the game short and finished him with a shot between the ears. Once the bear was dead, I decided to drag him over the crusted snow down to the trail, and he had apparently just come out of hibernation and had no stomach to speak of. It seemed better to take him home without skinning him, as I knew the meat would be in excellent condition. At the trail, we cut a poplar pole about 10 feet long, which we slipped between his feet, which were tied together fore and aft, and attempted to carry him that way. However, the pole was digging into our shoulders every step we took, as the bear was swinging from side to side. So I said, I believe I can carry this fellow by myself a lot easier. So Frank helped me get him on my back. placing a front leg over each shoulder, and we started down the trail. I actually covered over a mile before I wanted to put him down. We walked up 2nd Street in Revelstoke just as the people were going to church that evening. We went over to Billy Barton's photo studio on Mackenzie Avenue, and after climbing a flight of stairs with the bear on my back, I was able to stand up straight long enough for Billy to take our picture. As Frank wrote up the trip for Rod and Gun magazine in Canada, our picture appeared on the cover of the magazine in November. The bear measured over 7 feet and weighed 163 pounds, and he carried him 10 miles. Bear skin was purchased by Mayor Hector McKinnon, who planned to have it mounted life-size, and the Revelstoke Meat Market purchased the bear meat. And so Hartman Rowe continued to be a fur dealer both here and in Vancouver. And mentioned F.B. Wells, who was also had been dealing in furs. We actually have 2 of his ledgers where he wrote down the furs that he was buying from the trappers. A lot of the trappers were also prospectors, but they could actually make a more steady income on their trap lines than they could on their mines. Between 1914 and 1921, F.B. Wells purchased 599 bears, mostly in June and July. And of course, we have his fur press downstairs. And if you look on the side of the press, you can actually see some of his notations of how many bears or other animals that he was pressing in the fur press. The one year, I think that there's like 5 grizzlies mentioned that had been brought in. Can't talk about bears without talking about Ole the bear. And he was born in Sweden in 1879, and real Revelstoke character. Got to Revelstoke around 1900, and between 1914 and 1949, he delivered mail to the Big Bend using skis or snowshoes in the winter and a pack horse in the summer. He made 15 trips a year, so 1 a month in the winter months and 2 a month in the summer when he could go by pack horse. He also had a trap line along his mail route. One day he rounded a bend and came face to face with a grizzly, tried to run, but the bear closed in and slashed at his clothing. They were on a steep slope and it was slippery, so they actually kind of slid together, coupled together down the bank in the slush and snow. Ole managed to get to his feet and recovered his rifle. He fired at the charging bear, but even after it had been shot, the bear continued towards him, clawing at him. And Ole slipped, and the bear fell on top of him and died right on top of Ole. So he eventually struggled out from under the bear, shouldered his pack, and continued on his mail run. Ole the bear, his real name was Andrew Rupert Westerberg, and Westerberg Road is named after him. They had a family farm down there. Another story, a fellow from the owner of the Oriental Hotel wanted a bear hide for a rug. So Ole the bear set up a trap about 6 miles south of Revelstoke. He checked his trap one day, not expecting to see a bear, but there was a bear in the trap. But he didn't have his rifle with him. So he took out his axe and clobbered the bear on the head until it died. So eventually killed him, skinned him, and brought it into Albert Stone at the Oriental Hotel. I was talking about the idea of keeping bears as pets. The man on the right here, Bill Durand, he was a trapper and prospector and hunter in the area. You can see here the massive furs that they had after one season in around 1910. And he joined the 54th Kootenai Battalion, and somebody had rescued this little orphaned bear cub, and they took it as their mascot. They called it Coots because it was the 54th Kootenai Battalion. So he was their mascot. You can see on the right how he started up and then how he grew. And that's Bill Durand. He was the bear's handler. But later in 1915, the fall of 1915, the unit was getting ready to leave for France, and they actually tried to get permission to take Coots with them, but they were denied. And so they were seeking a home for the bear. Major Gilbert Anderson wrote to somebody in Nelson, seeing if he could find a home for the bear. And the major suggested that since the bear was so accustomed to being around people, it would make a good child's pet or a watch bear. So I haven't actually found out what happened to Coots, but again, I'm guessing it probably wasn't good. None of those stories usually ended well. Um, the interesting thing you've all heard of Winnie the Pooh, and Winnie the Pooh was a bear from Winnipeg, and a soldier from there actually managed to smuggle Winnie the Pooh over to Europe, and they got him to England, and there he was confiscated and put in the zoo. And when A.A. Milne was visiting the zoo with his son Christopher Robin, Christopher the bear was named Winnie after Winnipeg, where the bear had come from. And because Christopher Robin was a young child and young children like to make up names, he started calling him Winnie the Pooh. So that's where Winnie the Pooh came from a Canadian bear, but Coots didn't quite make it there. Also want to talk about a man named J.W. French, who was a big game hunter in this area. He was born in Ontario in 1890 and was actually worked as a brakeman and conductor for the CPR, but also did a lot of hunting. There was an article about him in the Ottawa Citizen newspaper in July 24th, 1959. It said that he had more than 150 grizzlies to his credit and approximately 50 years of hunting. His favorite hunting ground was the Big Bend country. Um, He said, as a guide, he met most of the famous hunters of the past generation. At times, he became a professional hunter to eliminate grizzlies, which were a menace to cattle ranchers. His hunting partner and guide was referred to as Leo Tennis, but I'm pretty sure his name was Leo Tenise. He was a Secwepemc man and related to Chief Kinbasket. So they did a lot of hunting and guiding together. And French also contributed to British Columbia and Ontario newspapers and Field and Stream and Rod and Gun magazines. He also has quite a few of his specimens mounted in did at one time, the Field Museum in Chicago. He began to help fill their collection in 1925. He also worked to set up the British Columbia Elk Reserve. Um, in June of 1922, there was an article in the Vancouver Daily World said, getting the greater grizzlies, bagging 4 silver tips in one day, including old One Ear, the granddaddy of all the grizzlies. And this is One Ear. This is from the J.W. French's collection. We have over 100 of his photographs and a lot of his notes and writings about his trips. He said, one really wonderful picture, probably the only one of its kind in existence, is that of old One Ear, a monster grizzly weighing nearly half a ton, snapped while swimming across a slough to attack Mr. French, who first threw stones at the wounded bear to provoke the attack, and then snapped him at close range. This was the biggest grizzly ever shot in the Big Bend district of the Columbia. And in that same trip, they bagged 3 other grizzlies. So if anybody wants more information on French, as I say, we've got an amazing collection of his writings and photographs. So before I get to this, one other story from the 1940s, there was a young man named Clarence Veers, who was in his 20s. He'd moved here with his parents earlier in the century. And it was believed that his body was found in June of 1948, but it was believed that he had died in November. It said the remains of Clarence Lemuel Veers, young Revelstoke trapper, were buried near his cabin in the Big Bend country last week by the party which went in search of him. The badly mangled remains were found by the party after a long and tedious journey to Veers' trapline. It is believed he was killed by a grizzly which came upon him at his cabin. Evidently taken by surprise, he had discharged 1 bullet at the animal. From the amount of food available, it is assumed Veers met death soon after he went up to his trapline last November. And there's Veers Crescent in Revelstoke that's named after his father, who's had an early home there. Yeah, so his date of death online is listed as November 10th, but that 1947, but that was an estimated date. Now, this photograph isn't related to this actual incident that I'm talking about, but this was one of the first references I found to trapping bears. There was Estelle Dickey took a photograph. The photograph was really grainy newspaper photograph, so I wasn't able to put it in the slideshow, but and sent the article to both the province and the Sun in Vancouver, and one of the province described the live trap as a culvert pipe smelling of fish. Said and the other paper said the garbage can habit isn't so fatal for bears now, at least in Revelstoke. They're trapped and taken a discouraging distance away instead of being shot on the spot. Said the common practice had been for provincial game officers to shoot bears who were getting into garbage. But this 2-year-old bear had, or that they referred to in the article, had been caught in a live trap by Bertram Pittaway, the chief warden of Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks, assisted by his 18-year-old son and provincial game officer George Lyons. So Parks Canada was trying to uh, live capture and relocate bears rather than shooting them, as had been more of the provincial way of doing things. So I've got a couple of photographs taken on the Rogers Pass Highway. This is a bear on a garbage gobbler. I don't know if anybody remembers garbage gobblers. I think there was one in an office in the Big Eddy there, still in the yards. But it was planned by the BC government to try to encourage more people to stop and throw their litter away rather than just tossing it out their windows. So they came up with garbage gobblers, which they thought they're unique and interesting enough that people would actually stop and throw their garbage away in the garbage gobblers. But the bears discovered them too. So this is an excellent photograph of a bear on a garbage gobbler. And then this picture I call our Yogi the Bear picture because there's a picnic basket over there. Classic old station wagon from the early 60s. So wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research that's gone on in the area. And I don't have tons of information. I'm sure there's people here who probably know way more than I do about this. But Bruce McClellan, who's a retired wildlife research ecologist with the BC Forest Service, spent 40 years studying the grizzly bear population in the Flathead Valley, and recently wrote a book. We don't currently have it in the gift shop, but we're going to be getting more in shortly. It's a very good book. My husband Ken worked with, or they shared an office at forestry for a long time, so Ken heard a lot of stories. And they Bruce and sort of a team of other researchers were the ones that came up with the DNA research of bears and used baited barbed wire to capture hair samples, which they were able to use to able them to properly count and identify bears and look at their gene flow and the diets of the bears. And he worked closely with Parks Canada, particularly John Flaw and John Woods and that project. Um, so Parks Canada has really had an active role in there. We've got Brendan Namone and Mas Matsushita with bear specimens.
Where is the Flathead Valley?
Kearney area, so
Kearney area.
Montana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's John Woods, who's with a beard, as now retired chief park naturalist for Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks. And he was very involved in the bear research as well. So this is sign at the dump. Beware of bears. Please deposit your refuse and leave the site as soon as possible. Do not feed or harass animals. I've heard from a lot of people who said when they had people visiting from out of town, they'd take them up to the dump to see the bears. That was what you'd do for entertainment. So in In 1989, there were a lot of letters to the editors of the newspapers. There are two residents of the CPR Hill wrote a letter about the practice of the conservation officers of trapping bears and shooting them rather than relocating them. They said that they and a lot of other people saw that, oh, if a bear was being trapped, they just assumed it was being relocated and discovered that in most cases they were being shot. So they were complaining about that, and there was a lot of other letters following that one. There was uh, Mr. Laidlaw from Laidlaw Road at the base of Mount Mackenzie, who was saying that there had been a family of bears that had been coming there for years, and they had they would put food out for them and their fruit trees, and they were accustomed to them. There'd never been any aggression, but somebody had complained, so the conservation officers came in and shot the bears. Um, in November of 1989, Save the Bears Committee was formed, and they set up a trust fund to pay for trapping and transportation of black bears. The committee president was Anita Coffin, who was really active in this movement. She actually uh, did a little, protest in front of City Hall with a placard, and complaining about the bears being shot. And Anita Coffin said, "The government tells us the problem is money." I thought, well, if they haven't got the money, I'll get the money. So they'd set up a fund at CIBC and already had $600 in a very short period of time. The committee wanted the government to change the policy of killing black bears and allocate more funds toward trapping and relocation. And they also wanted to see upgrades at the regional dump to prevent it from attracting bears to scavenge for food. So the committee, and they wanted to see more public education. They said in 1989, 46 black bears were destroyed within the city of Revelstoke. So in January of 1990, the committee met with the Provincial Environment Ministry, the Federal Park Service, and City Council. The committee rep was Bob Braid, who was Parks Canada employee. And he explained that bears are coming into town because of poor garbage management by residents and leaving fruit on trees. Discussed the possibility of mounting a public information campaign with members going door to door and developing an information package for schools. And here we have some Columbia Park students actually handing out flyers for the Save the Bears committee. And they had a Christmas float one year as well. And the kids all have their teddy bears with them. Um, the committee was also asking for changes at the regional landfill site to prevent bears from scavenging for food there, including electric fence. And they also asked for relocation of bears rather than killing them. The Environment Minister rep, Guy Woods, said that the lack of funds led to the policy favoring the relocation of grizzly bears, but shooting black bears. There was actually the Volker Sherm, who had Monarchy Outfitting Company, said that he would use money from the Wildlife Enhancement Fund of the Guide Outfitters Association of BC for removal of all bears caught in town. And they encouraged the local committee to use the funds they had raised for a public information campaign. So they launched their campaign in July of 1990, and they finished their first summer public awareness campaign at the end of September, and up to that date, only 3 bear kills had happened. All 3 of them had been noted as being aggressive bears, so down from 46 the previous year to 3. The campaign included articles in local papers, CBC radio interviews, distribution of pamphlets, and that the committee will evaluate the success of the program. Anita Coffin, the spokesperson for the committee, said she had been nicknamed the Bear Lady. And she was actually interviewed in that fall by a magazine called Nature Canada, who wanted to do a feature on their efforts to reduce bear kills. So the landfill was surrounded by electric fencing in 1994, and actually that increased the number of bears killed that after the fencing went in, because of the bears were looking for other food sources after the dump was no longer available to them. So the Save the Bear kind of eventually morphed into Bear Aware. And they've developed strategies to reduce bear and human conflicts. The average of killed bears was 27, and it's currently less than 7. There's one of the early coordinators for Bear Aware, Debbie Robinson, on the left at the farmers market around 2000 or so. And they were incorporated as a nonprofit society in 2004, but were operating prior to that. In 1998, the BC Conservation Foundation actually started a Bear Aware program based on the successes of the Revelstoke program. So this is a chart provided to me by Kate Nickel, who is the coordinator for Bear Aware. And Kate's here today, so I'm going to let her take over and talk a little bit about Bear Aware and some upcoming things that they have. And if you look here, this is the 1991 where they had just a few bear deaths. And there's a spike there, but there's a spike of grizzly bears, and we're not sure sort of what the story was behind that. So, Kate, if you'd like to come on up. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate. I am now the bear lady. It's really cool to see all of you here. It's really cool. So yeah, this is like a really great like outreach and education, how important it is and how effective it is. And I was also just at the International Human Bear Conflict Workshop, and they also spoke wonders about the importance of outreach and education and in communities, and it just like this just shows it, and it's really cool. Something that you'll notice is the blue here is the bears relocated, and it's like almost nothing. That's because research has shown that it's not actually effective or necessarily like ethical for the bears either. And so yeah, I was just thinking during that how Save the Bears started advocating for bears being relocated. And just through the times and research and everything, it's really changed to prevention and focusing on humans and our behavior as opposed to bear behavior. So yeah, Bear Aware is still very active in the community. We have 2 board members here, and yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you're hoping?
Well, if you'd like to talk about your presentation.
So I will be talking with Annie, who's also here with me. We kind of some of our findings of that conference we went to, and also just about the sort of the now and the future of human bear conflict and human bear coexistence, more importantly, in Revelstoke, sort of celebrating what we've done really well as a community. Both individuals like us as residents, but also like as a municipality. But there's always room for improvement and room for growth. And so sort of perfect piggybacking on all this history into like, what are we doing now and what can we do going forward to be working best practices. Yeah.
So the previous slide, what is the relationship between the number of bears, when the destruction was really high versus now? Like the total bear population, does it follow that?
I'm not necessarily sure about the total bear population. A lot of this is due to their natural food failures. So this year, for example, there would have been less natural food. So the bears are coming into town looking for that fruit, for that garbage, and are just getting desperate. And so they're resorting to coming into here. For example, this year I've received probably like record low bear calls, because there was such an amazing berry crop, or berry supply. And so it's been like talking to the conservation officers. They're like, "You've been getting many calls?" Because we haven't. I'm like, No, and I mean, that's great. We'll see the repercussions of it going forward, but,
So in 2000 and then 2023, there was no reporting or?
there was no bears killed in Revelstoke
Oh,
that
wow.
year. Last year was 3, and this year we're at 2 right now. So, the 7 or less, that's like a generous kind of average, but it's more like 5 or less, which is awesome, especially looking at this, like, we're reaching like 70, almost 70 there. And so I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, but,
I guess that was my question, like, were there a lot more bears then in the 80s and 90s?
Well,
There were bears.
yeah,
In terms of black bears, the province doesn't really monitor populations, so a lot of, you just don't know really how many black bears there are in BC. Like, there's a kind of a better idea of grizzlies in this area because of Parks Canada's collaring and monitoring programs, but you just have no idea how many bears there are. It's all anecdotal, so don't know.
Okay, I'm just going to close out the presentation and then we can
totally.
talk further. Thanks for coming. So I'd encourage you to come out this coming Tuesday, October 28th, for Kate Nickel and Annie Pumphrey. They'll be talking about some more recent information they got at the conference, talking a bit more about human and bear coexistence. So nice segue from today's talk. So I encourage you to come at 7 o'clock.
That here?
Yeah, it'll be right here. Yeah. And our next brown bag talk is November 5th, driving at the last spike. So I'm just going to stop recording here.